I remember the exact moment I realized something was terribly off. On a warm July morning, I stood at the rim of the old orchard with sweat trickling down my back, watching a line of surveyors' trucks rumble down the dirt path once used by my great-grandfather's Model T. The orchard's once lush trees had all but withered, victims of time and neglect, but I could still picture them in their prime, regal canopies that offered shade to my childhood daydreams. Now, the men from the trucks were unspooling bright orange measuring tape across the property, staking little neon flags every few yards. It felt sacrilegious, like strangers rudely rummaging around in a loved one's bedroom without permission. At that point, I wasn't even sure who these men were. All I knew was that new neighbors, lots of them, had moved onto what used to be my ancestral land over the last 6 months, installing pristine white fences and carefully trimming hedges. A recently formed homeowners association was behind it all, or so the rumors went. That day, I got my first close-up look at them, and what I saw ignited a spark of worry and curiosity in equal measure. When I approached to ask what they were doing, a heavily tanned man wearing a crisp polo shirt and carrying a clipboard offered a polite yet firm explanation. "This area is being surveyed for community improvements," he said, "just ensuring everything is up to code so we can finalize property lines." He must have noticed my grimace because he tried to reassure me. "Don't fret, ma'am. This is all standard procedure. We like to do things by the book." By the book. If only he'd known the volumes of ancient family lore that existed around this land. How meticulously my great-grandfather had penned every boundary. How cunningly my grandfather had updated each legal clause. Across 4 generations, my family always left a paper trail steeped in cryptic footnotes and cunning disclaimers, a tradition of burying the real story beneath neat paragraphs of dusty legalese. Now, with an entire HOA stepping onto my ancestral soil, it felt like an omen. Something big was about to happen. Growing up, I used to hear tales about that 100-year trap. My father would mutter those words whenever an official or a developer got too nosy about our property lines. He was a mild man in all other respects, soft-spoken, patient, but mention real estate or taxes, and his eyebrows would nod as he offered that half-smile that warned you to tread carefully. One day, he'd say, "They'll figure out your great-granddad wasn't just some hick orchard farmer." By the time I was 13, I knew better than to snicker at that. My father was far too proud of our lineage. And he wasn't wrong. My great-grandfather was shrewd, especially about land. He'd purchased these acres at the turn of the 20th century, then used a labyrinth of contractual clauses to keep it in the family. Over time, pieces of land did get sold, but always under certain conditions with certain hidden triggers like puzzle pieces shaped to fit only in certain ways. Not even I understood the details fully. When my father died, I discovered a curious chest in the attic, locked tight with a single brass latch. Inside were documents that dated back to 1922, papers so brittle and yellowed they looked ready to crumble if you breathed on them too hard. If an attorney had seen those documents, they might have described them as outdated or incomplete. But my father's meticulous notes, paper clipped to each set of pages, revealed a quiet cunning behind them. He'd annotated every line with references to boundary points, old diaries, and mysterious initials, as though deciphering a personal code. It was beyond me. I left them there, thinking I'd have time someday to sort through it all. I never expected the HOA to swoop in and start building like they own the place. Maybe I should have. As times changed, farmland dwindled, and property values soared, it was only a matter of time before local developers looked at our orchard's rolling hills and saw dollar signs. People want new construction, more golf courses, easy commute times. So a slick developer must have convinced the county board to rezone the land. Then the HOA formed, presumably under the impression that everything was neat and tidy. The only problem was that this orchard, and the soil beneath it, carried a century's worth of unspoken terms and conditions that no zoning board had fully deciphered. As the trucks rumbled closer that July day, something deep within me twisted. I felt the weight of my great-grandfather's cunning, my father's cryptic documents. I knew the land was still legally in my name. though the local registry likely had partial subdivisions filed under the HOA's brand new association. And that meant a collision course was inevitable. They're building on a foundation they don't fully understand. My father had warned in a letter I discovered among his things. One day, the orchard will remind them what it's truly worth. In the following weeks, construction exploded across those once quiet acres. At the orchard's edge, where gnarled trunks used to reach skyward, entire skeletons of new homes rose, row after row of them. A total of 156 houses, so I was told, with cookie-cutter designs and names like Maple Creek Estates. For a while, I nursed a kind of fury. How dare they tear up my family's ground? How dare they trample on this orchard's remains? Yet I mostly kept my distance, unwilling to fling myself headlong into legal battles I felt ill-equipped to handle. But soon enough, I started receiving official notices in the mail, warnings, fines, and demands for payment. Oddly enough, they were from the brand-new Maple Creek Homeowners Association, addressed to me by name. They claimed I owed back dues for shared community responsibilities. It was almost laughable. According to their records, I was a resident within their purview, even though my family's farmhouse stood about a mile away from the new construction. More puzzling still was the fact that they insisted I'd already waived certain rights when signing a mandatory community covenant. I never signed anything, I muttered, scanning the letter in my trembling hands. But you did, the letter insisted. My mind reeled. Was there some hidden clause that had them believing they owned not just the orchard, but me? I didn't know it then, but I was about to discover the full legacy of that 100-year trap. How my family had engineered a legal labyrinth that would break the unsuspecting HOA into pieces. And I was going to be the one to trigger it. One evening, I decided to revisit my father's attic chest, that heavy wooden trunk secured with an old brass latch. The trunk itself was scuffed with decades of wear, the corners blackened by dust. It groaned when I eased it open, as though the very bones of the thing wanted to keep its secrets. Inside, I found sheaves of documents stacked so precisely it looked like my father had measured them with a ruler. An old ledger from 1922, a folded blueprint showing orchard rows, newspaper clippings about land auctions from the 1940s, and pinned to the inside of the lid, a letter in my father's handwriting, dated the day before he passed. I could hardly breathe as I read. My dearest Claire, if you're reading this, it means fate has forced your hand. I wish you could see the orchard as it once was, ripe with apples, pears, peaches. Your great-grandfather left us the greatest inheritance of all, not wealth, but control. He never trusted outsiders. He knew they'd try to exploit the land. So he created a measure, hidden in the deeds, that would ensure no one could ever fully claim our property unless they did it on our terms. If you find this letter, it means you're in a fight for that land. The trap isn't about destroying others. It's about safeguarding what's ours. Read these documents carefully. You will know what to do. Love, Dad. I felt my throat tighten at the realization of how thoroughly my ancestors had prepared for this. But a fight? A trap? My father spoke of such things almost like bedtime stories, but I'd never imagined it would escalate to an entire association with 156 brand new homes. For days, I pieced through the documents, letting the orchard story unfold. My great-grandfather was a forward-thinking man. Through the original deed, he reserved certain reversionary interests that would revert the land to his descendants if very specific, highly unusual conditions were met. The language was archaic, referencing orchard yields, irrigation channels, and heritage apple seeds. But one line struck me like a thunderbolt. Should dwellings of any structure be built upon these orchard grounds without direct negotiation of purchase from the orchard's rightful heirs, all structures become subject to forfeiture in the interest of the orchard heirs. This includes lands improved upon or otherwise subdivided, effective immediately upon documented trespass. That was the core of the so-called trap. Anyone building structures on the orchard land without buying it correctly, according to the bizarre old contract from the 1920s, risked losing their entire investment. Over the years, small portions of the orchard have been sold properly, with explicit references to these archaic conditions. But the giant swath that the HOA built upon didn't seem to follow the terms. Had they found a loophole, or did they simply overlook them? As I delve into more recent documents, I saw that my father had meticulously updated certain points to align with modern legal standards. He even involved a lawyer from a neighboring county, a certain Mr. Graves, who specialized in antiquated property claims. It appeared they did everything by the book. My father's final note in that sequence was chilling. If an outside agency tries to overshadow these terms, file a petition for estate preservation under Article 13 of the county's property code. That will trigger the orchard's reversionary rights. I wasn't quite sure what that meant in practice, but I knew it was a legal time bomb, one that would detonate once I filed the right paperwork. If the HOA had built 156 homes in violation of a 100-year-old deed, then all those families might be living on land that effectively wasn't theirs. But would I dare pull that trigger? I wasn't an evil overlord, and these were real people with homes and mortgages. On the other hand, the HOA had been sending me threatening letters, acting as though I was the trespasser. Maybe they deserved to learn that the orchard still had a few seeds of power left. That's how I ended up sitting across from an elderly attorney, Ms. Caldwell, in a cramped office above the local hardware store. I showed her the documents. She examined them slowly, adjusting her reading glasses, her lips pursed. After what felt like hours, she gave a measured nod and said, "I see. You have the upper hand here, Ms. Green. The entire development may be built on your land without a valid chain of title. If that's true, you can effectively reclaim it all. Of course," she added, eyeing me thoughtfully, "it's a drastic move. There will be consequences." My mind flashed to the newly planted lawns, the row of mailboxes, the handful of newly minted families who'd pinned their hopes on a suburban dream. They certainly didn't suspect that the orchard's old contract was about to blow their investments sky high. But the HOA wasn't exactly giving me a choice, was it? Before I made any decisions, I decided to visit Maple Creek Estates in person. If I was going to upend their lives, I wanted to see the human side. The moment I drove into the neighborhood, I felt like I'd stepped onto the set of a real estate advertisement. Rows of sparkling new homes, each painted in an innocuous shade of beige or pale green. Carefully landscaped flower beds, identical driveways, the occasional decorative flag hoisted on a porch. Even the mailboxes matched, down to the same reflective house numbers. No one was outside, save for a man in a sweat-stained t-shirt kneeling to plant new pansies. As I strolled past the half-finished houses, I saw a bold sign hammered onto a stake. Maple Creek HOA, bylaws strictly enforced. Beneath it, in smaller letters, fines for noncompliance. My stomach twisted. This was precisely the kind of uniformity my great-grandfather had hated. He believed each patch of orchard told its own story. Each inch of earth had its own soul. To see it forcibly reshaped into a tidy grid of uniform boxes felt almost unnatural. I turned a corner and spotted the shining new community clubhouse. A young mother emerged, 2 toddlers in tow, while an older man in a polo shirt locked the doors behind them. I recognized him. It was the same man from the dirt path with the surveyor's trucks. The one who'd told me not to fret, that everything was by the book. His name was Mark Reeves, the HOA president. He spotted me from across the lawn, gave me a polite wave. "Ms. Green, right?" he called out. "You got our letters, I assume?" I walked up, my heart pounding. "I did," I said. "And I think we have an awful lot to discuss, Mr. Reeves." He cocked his head, offering the same bland smile as before. "Always happy to clarify the community guidelines. We can schedule a hearing if you prefer." His condescending tone nearly made me lose my composure. But I bit down the anger and forced a calm nod. "Sure," I said. "Let's talk soon, after I speak with my lawyer." For the briefest flicker of a moment, I saw something shift in his gaze, a hint of caution, maybe fear. He didn't know yet about my father's trap, but he could sense my determination. Without another word, I turned and walked off. I felt the orchard's legacy stirring in my chest like a dormant seed, ready to sprout. That night, I paced the living room floor of my family's farmhouse, reading and rereading the HOA's letters. They threatened me with fines for non-participation in communal upkeep, insisted I install a specific type of mailbox, and included an itemized list of alleged violations, like not trimming back shared hedges that grew along a boundary line I'd never recognized as theirs. It was absurd. These people had established a brand new community on land they didn't legally own, and now they had the audacity to act like I was the trespasser. My frustration ballooned as I saw just how many families were already living in Maple Creek estates. It wasn't just a handful of houses. Entire blocks were occupied. Children's bikes in driveways, porch lights twinkling at dusk, barbecue grills in backyards. Did they have any clue that the orchard they called home was entangled in century-old legal threads? If they did, maybe they dismissed it as inconsequential. More likely, they'd never heard about it. The developers must have assured them everything was ironclad. The notion made my head spin. How do I handle this? I asked an empty room. My words echoed off the old plaster walls. If I enforced the orchard's reversionary clause, those 156 homes could be in jeopardy. Yet if I did nothing, the HOA would run roughshod over me, collecting dues and threatening me with lawsuits until I rolled over. That was clearly what they expected, that I'd comply or slink away. They wanted to claim the orchard's legacy for themselves. I set down the letters and stared out the window. A harvest moon hung over the old orchard, bathing the bare branches in silver light. If you squinted just right, you could almost see the orchard from the 1920s when everything was alive and teeming with fruit. My great-grandfather had planted those trees by hand, row by painstaking row. That orchard once fed local families during the Depression, provided fresh cider that was the talk of the county. Now it was basically gone, but perhaps it still lived in the lines of old contracts, waiting for a caretaker to defend it. The next day, I arranged a phone call with Ms. Caldwell, my attorney. Her voice crackled through my old landline. "I've gone over the reversionary clause again," she said. "If those homes truly occupy orchard land, and if the deed was never properly transferred, your claim is solid." She paused. "But I do have to ask, are you prepared for the fallout? This will mean displacing families, taking on a well-funded HOA, possibly even dealing with banks that hold mortgages on those properties." My stomach churned. "I'm not trying to be a monster, Miss Caldwell, but they're the ones threatening me." "I understand," she said softly. "Just be aware, once you file, the county clerk will have to schedule a hearing. The HOA's lawyers will come after you, likely with everything they've got. They may argue the deed is outdated or that your father's updates don't apply. It could get ugly." I closed my eyes, remembering Dad's letter. "So be it," I replied, drawing on every ounce of resolve. "I'll do what I have to do." Ms. Caldwell gave a small hum of approval. "Then let's proceed. I'll file the paperwork by the end of the week." The news traveled faster than I expected. Perhaps Ms. Caldwell's actions pinged the right channels, or maybe the courthouse gossip mill took over. Either way, just a day later, I came home from grocery shopping to find a fancy black SUV idling at the end of my driveway. Leaning against the passenger door was Mark Reeves, the HOA president. He straightened when he spotted my car pulling up, then met me halfway to the porch. His face was neutral, somewhere between forced politeness and concealed panic. "Ms. Green," he began, "I hear you've hired legal counsel regarding the orchard land." I feigned mild surprise. "Who told you that?" He shrugged, offering a tight smile. "Word gets around. We're both grown-ups here, so let's speak plainly. This association has made significant investments. Hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars. People have mortgages, families. Do you really want to tear all that down? Because from what I hear, that's exactly what this reversionary nonsense could do." Anger flared. "Nonsense? That orchard's been in my family for over a century. If you'd bothered to research the deed, you'd know about the conditions. You can't just build wherever you please." Reeves sucked in a breath, likely unaccustomed to being challenged so directly. Then he lowered his voice, adopting a conciliatory tone. "Look, I can offer a settlement, maybe. A generous one, in exchange for you dropping this claim. We'll incorporate your old farmhouse into the HOA. Then you'd be protected with no more fines. You'd be part of the community. Isn't that better than stirring up a fight?" I felt my jaw tighten. "So your generous offer is for me to hand over my inheritance, so I can become a subordinate member of your fancy new neighborhood? Forgive me if I'm not jumping for joy." He paused, as though searching for the right words, but everything in his posture screamed frustration. "The alternatives won't do you any good," he warned, voice trembling slightly. "Litigation, public outrage, a mountain of legal fees. You'll be the villain who tried to ruin 156 families. You really want that on your conscience?" I felt a gnawing sense of guilt. For a moment, I pictured the children riding bikes, the families tending flowers. Did I want to be the neighborhood pariah, forcing evictions? Yet I saw no other path. The orchard's legacy was on my shoulders, and the HOA had been bullying me, refusing to negotiate in good faith. Without answering him, I turned and unlocked my front door. As I crossed the threshold, I called over my shoulder, "You might want to research the orchard's deed more carefully, Mr. Reeves. I'm not backing down." Then I slammed the door behind me. I felt both exhilarated and terrified. My father's 100-year trap was now in motion. The next steps would be complicated. Meetings, hearings, probably depositions. I was stepping into a battlefield that pitted a century of orchard history against the powerful forces of modern suburban expansion. But I had no choice. My great-grandfather's plan, my father's notes, and my own pride demanded I see this through to the end. Outside, the black SUV's engine revved. I peered out the window in time to see Reeves flip open his cell phone. No doubt calling a lawyer, a banker, or some bigwig at the local zoning board. Fine, I thought. Let him. This was bigger than just me or him. It was about promises made nearly 100 years ago, and I intended to honor them. Within a week, the county clerk's office scheduled a preliminary hearing. The tension in Maple Creek Estates rose palpably. You could practically taste the anxiety in the air. Homeowners whispered about lawsuits. The developer who built the neighborhood made desperate phone calls to the county commissioners. A few families even posted angry messages on community forums, calling me the Orchard Witch and accusing me of trying to scam them out of their homes. My mailbox was stuffed with letters ranging from polite inquiries to outright threats. On the morning of the hearing, I arrived at the county courthouse wearing my grandmother's pearl necklace, a small talisman of family pride. Ms. Caldwell led the way into the hearing room, which was no bigger than a classroom. Rows of folding chairs faced a wooden table and a tired-looking judge's bench. Mark Reeves was already there, flanked by 2 lawyers and a representative from the developer. Their expressions were grim. Among the spectators sat a few anxious homeowners, along with local reporters scribbling notes. The judge, a balding man in his 60s, peered over half-rimmed glasses. He called the session to order. Ms. Caldwell and Reeves's lawyers presented their arguments in measured tones. For the first hour, it was all dense legal jargon, surveys, deeds, property descriptions. I tried to keep my nerves in check, reminding myself of Dad's letter and the orchard's rightful ownership. Finally, Ms. Caldwell introduced the orchard's original deed from 1922. She read aloud portions referencing the reversionary clause. Reeves's lawyers tried to dismiss it as archaic, but Ms. Caldwell's methodical approach was impressive. She cited modern precedents where old covenants were upheld under certain conditions. Then she handed the judge copies of updated property records from the 1960s, 1980s, and even the 2000s, each containing references to the orchard's special status. The judge arched his brows, clearly surprised by how meticulously my father had kept the records consistent through the decades. Reeves's lawyers countered that their developer had purchased the land in good faith from a third party, some shell company that had apparently claimed to own those acres. The shell company was now dissolved, leaving a paper trail as murky as swamp water. "We have clear title insurance," they insisted. "Our clients acted in good faith, which is a valid defense." Ms. Caldwell shook her head. "Respectfully, that's not how it works with reversionary interests. If the orchard's original owners never relinquished their claim under the specific conditions mandated by these clauses, then no subsequent sale can be valid, good faith or not." The back and forth continued for hours. At last, the judge frowned at the piles of documents. "I'll need time to review," he said. "We will reconvene in 1 week for a ruling on the preliminary motion. However, I strongly encourage both parties to seek a settlement before then. We're dealing with the homes of many innocent families here." With that, he banged his gavel. The hearing ended in a haze of tension. Reporters flocked to Ms. Caldwell and me, peppering us with questions. I offered only a brief statement. All I want is fair treatment and respect for my family's legal rights. We never intended for this situation, but the orchard has its own story, one that deserves to be honored. That evening, I drove by Maple Creek Estates. It was just past sunset, and lights glowed in the windows of every house. The roads were dotted with parked cars, the sidewalks with couples walking dogs or pushing strollers. You'd never guess there was a legal storm swirling overhead. The peaceful exterior reminded me that these were real people. My chest tightened with guilt for the chaos unfolding around them. But as I parked near a half-finished house, I noticed something that gave me pause. The landscaping crew was frantically digging up a portion of the sidewalk. Why, I couldn't tell. Nearby, a crew member was cursing under his breath. I overheard snippets of conversation about underground pipes and wrong coordinates. Could it be something as simple as a misplaced water line? Or was it connected to the orchard's decades-old irrigation system, which had never been properly mapped? Curiosity piqued. I walked closer, hearing them mention the orchard's old drainage channel. My father's notes had described such a channel, used to divert surplus water from the orchard to a distant creek. If it still existed, it could run beneath the new homes, possibly affecting their foundations. I decided to make a mental note to check the orchard's historical irrigation maps. This might be another piece of the puzzle. The orchard's infrastructure that no one had accounted for, physically or legally. The next day, Ms. Caldwell called. She sounded almost giddy. They want a settlement meeting. The developer's attorneys reached out first thing this morning. The memory of last night's frantic construction scene flashed in my mind. Maybe the developer had realized how deep the orchard's roots truly ran. Maybe they feared a meltdown if the judge upheld our claim. "What are they offering?" I asked. "Unsure yet," she replied. But they wouldn't call unless they were nervous. I took a shaky breath, feeling a mix of relief and apprehension. Let's hear them out. 3 days later, we met in the plush conference room of a downtown law firm. Outside the windows, the city skyline shimmered in the midday sun. The developer's attorneys offered carefully worded apologies for any oversight regarding the orchard's deed, then pitched a new idea, a significant lump sum for me if I waived the orchard's reversionary clause. They'd also agreed to name a small park in honor of my family. In return, I'd concede any ownership claims to the 156 homes. I glanced at Ms. Caldwell, searching her expression for guidance. She gave me a small nod, indicating the amount was more than fair from a purely financial standpoint. But the orchard was never about money. It was about honoring the land's history, my great-grandfather's vision, my father's final wish. Part of me struggled with guilt at the idea of effectively selling out. Could I stomach signing away my family's legacy? Yet if I refused, families might lose everything. I cleared my throat. How about restoration of part of the orchard? Maybe a historical preserve. The attorneys exchanged glances. We could consider a green space, sure, one offered, but it might cut into the HOA's planned amenities. And as for the orchard original farmhouse, I said firmly, no forced membership in the HOA, no mandatory dues. I keep it separate, standing as a testament to what this land used to be. After a tense back and forth, they agreed, reluctantly, to set aside a modest tract of land near the orchard's eastern edge to be rehabilitated as an orchard preserve. They'd also removed the farmhouse from the HOA's domain. My father's 100-year trap had given me leverage to demand these conditions. If the orchard land was truly as threatened as the document suggested, I wanted at least a corner of it to remain as a living monument to my family's legacy. We finally emerged from the conference room with a preliminary agreement. The developer's attorneys looked weary, but also relieved. They dodged a legal and financial bullet. 156 homes would remain standing, families wouldn't be uprooted en masse, and I'd receive a settlement plus the orchard preserve. It was far from perfect, but it felt like a balance I could live with. The final step was returning to the county courthouse, where the judge approved our settlement as part of the official record. Mark Reeves, still HOA president, shot me a half-hearted smile as we passed each other in the hallway. Maybe he realized the orchard's power was beyond his control, or maybe he just knew the developer had mitigated the worst of the crisis. A week after everything was signed, I walked through the orchard's eastern edge, scanning the neglected rows of ancient fruit trees. Though most were beyond saving, a few stubborn trunks still stood. I knelt in the soil, placing my palm against the bark of a tree whose top branches had been cut away to make room for a property line. A breeze whispered through the leaves, carrying the scent of earth and memories. I thought of my great-grandfather, my father, and the legacy they'd passed down. The orchard had indeed trapped an unsuspecting HOA, forcing them to confront a century-old claim. In the end, it wasn't about punishing families or collecting a windfall. It was about proving that our heritage, our roots, and our rightful ownership could not be casually bulldozed. And now, with a sliver of orchard preserved, a portion of that heritage would endure, a living testament to the land's story. Back in the farmhouse, I carefully packed away Dad's documents and letters in the same attic trunk. I included my own notes, photographs of the orchard's remains, and a copy of the final settlement. Perhaps someday, another generation would open that trunk. They might gasp at how a cunning 100-year-old deed once toppled an entire development's assumptions. They might stand beneath the orchard's canopy, restored if the preserve thrived, and taste the fruit of a victory that began with a humble farmer's foresight. Whatever the future held, I was at peace. I'd honored my family's land the best way I knew how. The orchard's trap had sprung, and in doing so, it had carved out a space for history in a modern world that often forgets its past. And maybe, just maybe, that space would inspire the next caretaker to guard it just as fiercely, ensuring that our orchard's roots would run deep for another 100 years to come. The end.